everyone know, it will be recorded, and after the webinar, we'll probably put it on YouTube or something like that, the session. And the other thing that I would like to say to you is this is one of many webinars. So this is the first one, but we plan to do this fairly regularly, and I'm going to share some details about that as well. Okay, let's begin. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to start my presentation. Um, where's full screen? I'm sorry, it's early in the morning for me, so I'm just going to do this. Um, so let's begin. Firstly, thank you very much for joining and welcome everyone to this inaugural webinar on Aerobridge. Aerobridge is a project that was conceived, let's say, 4 months ago or 3.5, 4 months ago, and we are now ready to share some of these things that you will see. For some of you, I know this is for the first time. And what I want to do is to give you a gentle introduction to Aerobridge and what we are doing and sort of the structure of the project. For some of you who have been working and operating in India for a while, it may not be news, but what we're going to do here is to go on the technical details of some of these things. So just a bit of a background, I work and founded a company called Open Skies, and we work exclusively or almost exclusively in the open source. You can go to github.com/openskies-sh and you will see a list of projects that we are sort of leading. Things like an open source flight feed aggregator, a broadcast remote ID viewer. There is a open source aviation or a drones focused identity and authentication service. I've done work on the registration side and so on. So there is a huge repository of open source code that you can take a look at. Some of it is we find very useful for your company and some of your day-to-day operations. At some point, if you're interested in this, I'm more than happy to talk about this. But I just wanted to sort of let you know that this is one of the many projects, open source projects that we are sort of interested in and working on. So we are, it's solely a company focused on open source for UTM or USpace as it's called in Europe, and of course now in India as well. So let's talk about what's going on in India. Some of it is obviously not news to you, but I just want to refresh your memory about this. This was the RPAS guidance manual that came out a couple of years ago. Basically, there is a regime called NPNT, which means no permission and no takeoff. What it really means is that for every flight in India, every drone flight, the operator has to get a permission from the Digital Sky APIs. Now, the way they have done it is through this thing called as the permission artifact, which sort of hooks into the GCS and then into the flight controller module. And then once the flight has been completed, you're expected to sort of send the flight logs back to the Digital Sky APIs. And so essentially what happens now is that this red box that you see is the part where Aerobridge comes in. Essentially, in the DGCA's language, it is a manufacturer's management server. So if you look at it over here, and what does it do? Well, it helps you manage all your fleet of drones. It helps you communicate and store all the flight logs and the public key and the private keys that are supposed to be in there. And then it can interact with the Digital Sky ecosystem. So basically, instead of having sort of you to do all of these things one by one for every flight, Aerobridge Stack can sort of help you interact as a manufacturer or an operator of this service. So in summary, here's what it looks like. You have Digital Skies APIs managed by the DGCA that have the, let's say, the permission artifacts or who issue the permission artifacts. Then you have the Aerobridge management server, which stores the public keys and the private keys on your side, the operator or the manufacturer's sort of key signing infrastructure. Then the Aerobridge connects to the GCS through what is known as a Mavlink Aerobridge, sort of a flight kind of a flight control software, GCS software, but we can sort of customize it for any GCS software. And then finally, you have this stack. I know Siddharth is with us, but basically you can sort of do it on the PX4 or Ardru Pilot side as well. So this is the entire stack. And then the point of this is that this Aerobridge helps you manage your flight logs, your public and private keys as a manufacturer or an operator. And also, additionally, once you change your equipment, maybe you get a new drone and so on, you can store some of that information in Aerobridge and, of course, update the DGCA's infrastructure. Not too long ago, there was a new, let's say a few weeks ago, there was a new, let's say, document about a draft policy from the DGCA. So some of this is should be familiar to you. I will send you a link if it is not, but this is a document that they have sort of drafted and shared. And this is, let's say, a new world perhaps that's coming, or not so new world that's coming. And this raises a little bit of an interesting questions, and this is some of the things that we're going to touch on today. In the new document that they have shared, one of the things, if you notice, is that they have said that the permission artifact can be received or issued to what is known as an UTM-SP. Okay, so you can have somebody get this permission artifact on your behalf. So operators can obviously communicate with the UTM-SP and get the permission artifacts for the flight. But one of the issues with this whole system, this new system that they're proposing, is that the permission artifact is linked to a flight or a drone hardware. So in some ways, the role of the UTM-SP, as it's traditionally known in, let's say, US and Europe and other places, is slightly blurred, because not only now do you have to upload, get the permission artifact from UTM-SP, you also have to upload and download these logs and send your public and private keys to the UTM-SP. And from the UTM-SP side, how do they know that this is the drone that you're actually flying? So if you get a permission artifact for one drone, how does the UTM-SP know that the operator is actually flying that drone? So while this paper is a huge step for India, obviously, there are some issues to be solved. And I think that this is one of the reasons why Aerobridge is interesting, because it acts as a sort of a middle gateway between the UTM-SPs and the operators and so on. Back to the Aerobridge stack, we have really three things. One is what is known as Aerobridge server. It's basically a Python Django-based backend server, which has storage for logs, public and private keys, calling APIs, and so on. We have Mavlink Aerobridge, which is basically a sort of a Mavlink sort of based Python code that sort of manages the transference of these permission artifacts and public and private keys between Aerobridge, which stores it, and the drone. And then finally, we have sort of an RFM module. This is a little bit of a work in progress. Now, as far as the server is concerned, I wanted to show you where we are with this. So not all of Aerobridge is ready, but just wanted to show you where we are. Basically, this is the server API. You can take a look at it. It's on GitHub and all of that. But you can start to see, essentially, from a manufacturer and operator point of view, the kind of things that you can do with this. So basically, here is all the list of aircraft. Then you have add a new aircraft. Then you can execute a drone registration with Digital Sky. Then you have, for example, flight permission artifact stored. So a permission artifact linked to an operation, linked to a drone and a manufacturer, as you can see here. as I show you this to you. And you can take a look at this. And of course, this API will sort of develop, and there are additional things with it, with flight logs and so on. But the point is that the server is, I would say, 70, 80% ready, and we are already starting some of the testing for this. And all of this, this management server is basically going to help you store some of this data for your operations. As I said to you, it has a sort of ability to understand flight operations and plans. So once you have done it in mission control or whatever GCS you use, you can then upload it to this management server, the manufacturer's management server, as the DGCA calls it, and then basically have this history of all the missions that you have flown and the permission artifacts associated with it. In addition, you can start to store things about the drone, the public key, private key of the RFM, and so on. So basically, without a management server as an operator or a manufacturer, you have to do all of this manually, right? And this is the kind of the problem it solves. And then you have the logs management and uploads and so on. This is what Mavlink Aerobridge looks like right now. Essentially, it is using Mavlink to communicate with the drone. It is very, very simple. On the left-hand side, you have the drone commands, and on the right-hand side, you have the Aerobridge commands. You can download it and play with it, and we are going to do some additional testing. So all of this is, let's say, very alpha code and sort of not 100% ready, and we are really looking for people to join us in doing some of the initial testing. My anticipation is that this is let's say 3 or 4 months away, the final production versions of these. But we are ready to share some of this with the broader community and ask them to engage with us. But the idea here is you have an Aerobridge instance and you have a drone, and then you can do all the things that DGCA says you need to do from the drone and from the Aerobridge side as well. Now, as I said to you, we are in this funny situation where the policies can and will change. And then you have this sort of a new way of this three versions of digital skies and this notion of private UTMSPs. Now, the thing that is different in India is that they have this notion of permission artifacts. And as far as the draft policy is concerned, the permission artifact will always be issued by Digital Sky, but it can be acquired through UTMSP. Now, where Aerobridge comes in, I guess from an interest point of view, from an operator point of view, is that not only now do you have to link all your flights to the UTMSP, you have to also give in the keys and the logs and everything to the UTMSP. So essentially, operators have to make a decision of how deeply they want to integrate with the UTMSP. And from the UTMSP point of view, what they need to know is if I have a permission artifact, how do I know this is the right drone that is going to be flown? Or how do I know that this is the right controller, and so on? So you are in this situation where the sort of the traditional definitions of UTMSP or the traditional definitions of an operator are kind of blurred. And some companies may want to go, obviously, very deep integration with each other, and some companies may not. And anybody who does this integration has to develop this stack anyways, because without it, it will be very, very hard. So this is maybe a question that we can all answer or have a discussion about after our call. But one of the things that we are trying to do is to have a sort of a very thorough understanding of what it takes. And that's why we have this sort of we decided to do this webinar and sort of open up some of these conversations for for people like yourself and others who are interested in sort of understanding what this new policy can look like for them. Of course, if you are a manufacturer or an operator or a delivery company or UTMSPs that you are now or in the future, we are looking to work with you. We, as in Aerobridge, the project, and Open Skies, the company as well. Really, you get three things. Basically, partnership with Open Skies and sort of this project to have this open source capability within your company's stack. If you are a manufacturer and operator, you will need this in the future at some, if not distant, something like this to have the scale in operations. If you're a UTMSP, you will need to understand how the flight controller is being sort of sent, the permission artifact and so on. So what we're saying is that we have about a 6 or 8 week program starting the 1st of February, where we are looking to work with both operators and UTMSPs to try to test this stack on there. And the real ask is basically one person who has a drone who can work with us and maybe deploy some of these and then sort of do these operations. And then you will get as a return, as a thank you or sort of as a sort of a tester, an instance of Aerobridge. So we call this the Aerobridge Canary program. My thinking is that it will help you figure out where you sit once some of these new policies are coming about. And if you are a manufacturer and operator, in 3 or 4 months, by using this stack, you will be able to connect to Digital Sky and speed up some of your operations from a compliance point of view. I appreciate that at the moment there is one system, and then at some point in the future, we don't know yet, there will be, let's say, a slightly different version of this system. And so we are trying to work in this background. And I'm going to share you all of these slides later. But just to sort of conclude, I wanted to show you essentially the whole technical stack of where we are with this project. So we have the RFM firmware, the GCS, the management server, and the Digital Sky API. And as you can see here, most of them have been implemented. So in the next few months, we will expect that you can use the stack with the current, let's say, regulatory environment in India. And then as it changes in the future, we will make sure that this will be, let's say, compliant with them. We are a very small group. I work on it. I'm the lead developer. We have some people in the Slack channel, some very enthusiastic people. So thank you for joining. And you are in a company of basically very very solid technical people who will help you understand really what all of this public key, private key, permission artifacts are. It can get a little bit technical, but what is more important is that your company understands what it means to have uploading all of your data to a second company or something like that. And that's me. My name is Rishi. I run a company, as I said, called Open Skies. I'm a lead developer. I have a lot of background in open source software for UTM and USpace. There is a huge bunch of them we can talk about. And I primarily work with the national drone programs and the civil aviation agencies. That's my email if you want to get in touch with me. And I think I'm going to conclude and maybe have a few sort of minutes of question and answer. And I know that we have Gaurav as well, who's going to join us in a few minutes. But maybe I will stop my screen sharing and then just open it up for questions. So we have a lot of people, so please unmute yourself and also mute back, please. Maybe we start with some questions, comments, and then we'll have Gaurav as well.
Hi Rishi, Mayank here. Thanks for the presentation. It was really enlightening. I have two questions. One, as per the new schema, then does Aerobridge aim to sit between the operator and the UTM-SP, or will every operator essentially be like an instance of the Aerobridge stack?
So the answer to your question is that it depends on what the operator wants to do. Aerobridge is open source in that the operator can deploy Aerobridge themselves and use it to manage their flight logs and multiple drones and keys and so on. But basically, the concept is that you got it right, where Aerobridge will sit between UTM-SPs and operators, basically. But some operators may want to just sort of have a very deep partnership with one UTMSP, and they want the UTMSP to handle everything: public keys, private keys, flight logs, everything, and that's also fine. And then in that case, Aerobridge is not that useful. But sometimes you don't want to give public and private keys to third parties.
Sure. So what you're basically saying is it's left up to the operator to decide how much of Aerobridge they want to use and how they want to structure the relationship with the
Precisely,
UTMSPs.
precisely.
The second question I had was along the dev cycles that you've planned.
Hi. So I had a question regarding Aerobridge.
And private keys to
Decide how much of Aerobridge they want to
Let
use.
Mayank
And
complete
I want
his
to
question.
Yeah, sorry. So my second question was regarding compliance testing with the DGCA. Like at what stage does DGCA come in and at what stage do we say that, okay, we want to submit Aerobridge to ensure that it is compliant with the new RPAS guidelines and things like that? Like what's the plan for that?
Yeah. So you are sort of talking about the future, Mayank. My anticipation is once we have some guidelines from the DGCA about this, at the moment it's at a draft policy stage, let's say. So we would hope that we would engage through those processes essentially. And from a timeline point of view, my estimation is that April, May, we will be ready to do something like that. At the moment, we're not. And so what we're doing is using the Digital Sky Sandbox API that they have, the Docker thing, and then sort of using through that. But at some point, it will be there. The beauty of this is that it's open source and it's not a proprietary solution or anything like that. So it's I mean, once they are okay with it.
Thanks.
Sorry, Abhishek, tell me, you had a question?
Seems like he placed a question inside the chat. So the question is, would there be a physical module in the drone?
It's funny that you're saying this, Siddharth, but no. So the way the DGCA or this whole NPNT sort of system is working is that DGCA issues an XML, it could be a JSON, a permission artifact, and that has to be linked to a flight controller in the drone. Now, is that, well, it is a physical module in that it is the drone flight computer. And so somehow you have to transfer that permission artifact into the drone. At the moment, we use it using Mavlink, but I will anticipate other GCS doing it in other ways.
So in a sense, there has to be a single board computer or such on board the drone.
Well, there is one. I mean, it's called ArduPilot or PX4 or whatever. I mean, what this is that they will have let's say a modified version of ArduPilot called NPNT ArduPilot or something like that, which, by the way, Siddharth and others have worked a lot on. And then that is linked to the permission artifact. Maybe Siddharth, you can maybe make a comment on this, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. So basically your flight controller will behave as an NPNT registered flight module. So you can publish like whatever permission artifact that you receive from the higher levels, it will be consumed right by the flight controller, which you have already that's how you're flying, so that you already have that flight computer. So that will be the one who will consume the flight, those artifacts and will pass it and make the decision. So this flight module has to be a registered flight module, basically something that is already tested working with the NPNT scheme that you would do during the registration process of the drone system, basically. So I hope that clears your answer.
All right. So it will be different from the traditional PixHawk.
No, it would most likely be the same hardware. Maybe we'll see if we can fit it in the older versions. What versions it will like of the hardware to be supported, that is yet to be explored. But all the newer boards more or less will support it, as supported by the ArduPilot. Yeah, I would guess at least F7 and above STM32 chips will definitely be supported. F4 is still under evaluation if we can put it on that or not, due to concerns of space and configuration. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Siddharth. Any other questions?
Yeah, hi Rishi. This is Bikram here.
Hello. Hi.
So, yeah, so I have a quick question. So while insurance, we know that insurance is mandatory for all drone flights in India. So how do we intend to make sure that every drone flight is compliant when it comes to drone risk management? Because could not see any of that in any of the frameworks or architecture. So
No, that's a great point, Bikram. So this is one of the reasons why things like Aerobridge are useful, because essentially, if you think of an operator's management server or a manufacturer's management server, let's say a permission and artifact is given for one drone, and then that has to be deployed on the drone. By the way, not only that, once the drone flight is complete, the way it is set up right now, you have to upload the log back to the DGCA. So there is that sort of closing of the loop. But without a management server in there, it is very hard to link what really happened, because at least this way you can say this was the flight, this was the permission artifact, and this was the log, and from an insurance point of view, if something goes wrong, you can do an audit of it. But without the management server on the operator's part, how do you know? How do you know that this drone is actually the one that flew and not some, like drone that is not certified, and so on? And the issue with this new policy, or I wouldn't say an issue, but the interesting thing about this is that they are saying that a UTMSP can issue a permission artifact. But then the question again becomes, how do you know, how does a UTMSP know which drone flew? And this is why this management server is kind of useful and important. And by the way, if you look at the chart that DGCA provided, the management server, this term does not come from me, or I didn't invent it. You see here, manufacturers' infrastructure, they actually have, I mean, this is their terminology. They want manufacturers and operators to have a management server so that insurance, audit, logs, and so on can be tracked, essentially.
Okay.
That is linked to the operator's GCS,
Got your point. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks. Questions? Any more questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Sundaresan here.
Hi, Sundaresan.
And this is a very nice webinar. And I have a question, like, if I'm a operator and I have, say, 10 drones, and it is all compliant with NPNT Autopilot or PX4, and I can run the management server from my side. I can easily run without depending on other third-party people. Like, if, say, for a manufacturer, they are selling NPNT drones, and I bought their drones, but instead of connecting to their management server and passing the public key and private key to the Digital Sky API, I can do it on myself from my Linux server, say it is running on AWS, like that. Is that correct?
Correct. So this will basically, you can deploy this on your infrastructure, on your AWS or Azure or whatever else you use, and then connect directly to Digital Sky. But the new policy says that you will need some interaction with UTMSPs, and they can give you the permission artifact as well. So at the moment, you have two choices. One is you say, I am just going to sort of, let's say you have 10, 20 drones and you don't really want to use some other system. You can use this to do this, and then eventually when the policy changes, you can link it or not. But this is basically what this is. You can deploy it on your infrastructure and then store all of these for you, and keep it safe and secure and all of that.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
Hello, this is Dr. Jaganraj from Tech University.
Hi, Dr. Jaganraj.
Nice to meet you, and I appreciate your work, and it will help the startup, many entrepreneurs, those who don't have money to invest on this NPNT platform, and I am really happy to contribute to your project. Since we are university, we have experts in computer science department, electronics and communication engineering department. So we have certain resources, manpower resources. So if you want any help, we are happy to help.
Perfect. Well, I think we have this Canary program, like I said to you, Dr. Jaganraj. I think you should apply there. I will send you the link and so on. And I think that with the testing, particularly on the firmware side and the actual drone side, that's where it will be very useful. You will get instructions and so on. I know you're on the Slack channel as well. Yeah, so please join us there. As I said to you, this is open work. It's an open project where Open Skies comes in is basically where we can support you and all of that. Yeah, please join there, and I really hope to work with you guys as we move forward with that.
Yes, thank you.
Hey, Dr. Rishi, one more question.
Yes, hi, Mike.
Yeah. So throughout the flow of testing for all the different components of Aerobridge, do you envisage shuttle drones being a key component, or do you feel like a bulk of the testing effort has to be to ensure that all the different flavors of PX4 hardwares out there are actually working well with the ecosystem? So what I'm trying to understand is, should I actually get a PX4 and in order to make a meaningful contribution, or do you see a role for shuttle drones being good enough for validating most of the stack as well?
Yeah, the answer is both. I don't think I expect you to, or anybody, by the way. This is an open source project, so the expectation is whatever you can do, by the way.
Yeah.
So
I would also like to add to this point. For instance, platform like ArduPilot already has something called SITL, which you can actually simulate the entire flight stack inside your laptop without actually using any hardware. So I would imagine something like that be in place for testing as well. So you can actually do this in your system as a simulation rather than actually going out and buying hardware.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe it is obviously always useful to have actual hardware, but as far as I know, ArduPilot says if it works in the SITL, then it will work in the real drone. So I think it will be nice to do it on real hardware as well. And Dr. Jaganraj, as he said, that he can have students and some flights, but the answer is everything. We can test, we hope to test in all aspects of it. Things like IDs and so on in the SITL, it's a little bit difficult, but I think obviously, Mike, I don't expect anyone of the community to buy new drones and so on for this. I think we will work with the existing things that we have.
Sure, thanks.
Hi, Rishi. This is Sandeepan.
Hello, hi Sandeepan. Tell me.
Yeah, I have a quick one. So, in terms of what is your point of view on integrating remote ID? Do you have any roadmap on that? Because there are quite a bit of discussions happening on the remote ID integrations.
Yeah. So you're touching like I don't know what you call it, like a Pandora's box or some sort of like it's a webinar in itself. I have 2 or 3 small things that I can share with you on remote ID. As you know, there are 2 flavors of them: network and broadcast.
That's right.
And for network remote ID, there is a thing called inter-USS, which will intercommunicate between the different USSs. And when we talk about remote ID and its integration, if you look at the GitHub that I shared earlier, there are 2 projects called Flight Blender and Flight Spotlight. And really, those are the ones that will integrate remote ID. By the way, they are all open source as well, and we can talk about them at some other later date. But I think my short answer to you, Sandeepan, is that there will be let's say, open source visualization story on it. Now, as far as the broadcast remote ID is concerned, there is no standard. It's being developed. The FAA just released this rule and so on. So I can imagine there will be standards, but whatever it is, for sure, PX4, ArduPilot, and all these others will incorporate it somehow. So I mean, any remote ID standard will be open and public. They will not use proprietary standards, I hope, but
That's right.
Then we'll just integrate it essentially.
Lovely. Thank you.
Hey, sorry, another quick question. Is fleet management something which you envisage as within the purview of Aerobridge as well, beyond just management of the permission artifacts?
So we have to be a little bit careful, Bank, here. The answer is, how do you say? At the moment, you can do fleet management, very basic one. Basically, what you have is you have a list of drones and the public and private keys associated with that and some other details around the controller and so on. So that functionality already exists. But is it fleet management the way maybe I understand it? Probably not. At the moment, it's just like, here are all my flights, all my equipment, and all the sort of associated parameters around it. I think this is a question that, how do you say, that needs to be answered a little bit carefully, because obviously it is not Aerobridge's goal to sort of build fleet management software or something like that. I mean, there are software that exists, or what we are more interested in this sort of link between hardware, keys, and permissions. Now, which means that you need to have some fleet management capability, and what it means is just we have tables for multiple drones.
Sure, makes sense.
Any other questions? Is Gaurav, did Gaurav join, by the way?
Yes, I'm.
Perfect. Hi, Gaurav. Yeah. So maybe we just have a few questions, and then I'm going to hand it over to Gaurav as well, because I think he has some kind of important things to say as well. Maybe a few other questions if you have them. If not, then we'll give it to Gaurav.
Hi, Dr. Frishi, David Guerin here. Just, I'm going to prove how naive I am, but I really appreciate the in-depth presentation. If an operator doesn't have any internet connectivity and they want to have authorization to fly or any of these tools that are provided, how does that work?
So to get the permission artifact, David, you need the internet connection. So you need to have an internet connection to get the artifact. But once the artifact is on the drone, which obviously doesn't need internet connection because it's done through Mavlink, then you are okay, in the sense that my anticipation is you get the permission artifact in your office, then you go to your field and then do whatever. Basically, the permission artifact is linked to a flight plan. And so technically you cannot fly without the permission artifact and the flight plan. You need the internet to get it, basically.
Okay, that's a good explanation. Thanks very much. And just being mindful of India's, I think it's the drone ecosystem roadmap. Are there any barriers to Aerobridge potentially functioning across international borders? So operators would have to come in and get all their Indian approvals, etc. But could it then be expanded to be outside the Indian CAA as well?
Yeah, I think my experience with this, David, is that NPNT is a very uniquely Indian thing at the moment. But I can imagine countries, perhaps India's neighbors, let's say countries in the Middle East or something like that, adopting this way of thinking. Basically, most of Europe and the US has this, in uncontrolled airspace, below 400 feet, I'm not too concerned about what's going on. Use inter-USS or broadcast remote ID to deconflict and so on. But what the DGCA has said is that we want to track and sort of at least be in the know of all the flights. And of course, it will change once the flight density increases. But I think something like this, some version of this will exist in other countries. That's the way I would, if I was a betting man or something like that, that's the way I would put it. Maybe not in like Western Europe, US, Australia, and some of, let's say, that group of countries, but certainly places like India, India's neighbors, Middle East, Africa. I would anticipate, I think, but that's speculation, by the way. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, I really am keen to give it to Gaurav, please. It's yours, Gaurav, please. By the way, Gaurav has kindly agreed to come and talk to us. Gaurav Godwani is the director and the co-founder of the Civic Data Lab. And if you haven't seen it, maybe I will use this opportunity to introduce your work, Gaurav. Go to State of FOSS. Just if you look State of FOSS and you go to stateoffos.in, his group has written this big report and he's going to talk to us about it. But he is hugely involved in open source software, and I thought that he was a great sort of guest, and he's kindly agreed on a short notice to come and share some of his thoughts with us. So the floor is yours, Gaurav.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for having me here, Rishikesh and Vibhu. Let me see if I can present my screen. Just give me a second. I can see my screen. I can. Presentation mode. Let me know when you can see my screen.
We can.
Great. So thanks a lot, Rishikesh and Vibhu, for having me here. I would just briefly talk about the study we have done on the state of free and open source software in India, and how experiments like Aerobridge can form really strong shape of building a software economy in India. So I would briefly talk about that as well. So just defining very briefly what free and open source software is. So it's something which is freely licensed to use, copy, study, change, improve, and redistribute. So you can do all of it because Rishikesh and other authors of this code of Aerobridge has decided to keep it open. So I think that is very important that they licensing their work in open for others to collaborate, co-create, work with them, and see how find opportunities to reuse the software to make it slightly more stronger, slightly more vibrant in terms of new features and new availabilities, new APIs, and so on. So I think that is possible. And mostly free and open source software comes from two moments, free software and open software. Both have slightly different cultures and philosophies, but have slightly similar ownership models. So we keep using FOSS as a combined term in this presentation, in this discussion. As well, we would be referring to FOSS as free as well as open source software. While the free software comes from more of the freedom for users to reuse the software, have more control on the software piece, and the open source software comes from a shared sort of a roadmap of co-creation, more suited for businesses and more suited for different organizations to collaborate openly. And you might not know, but India runs on FOSS. More than 85% of India is currently running on free and open source software. If you're booking train tickets, you're most likely hitting IRCTC servers, which run on open source. If you're getting a life insurance, it is also running through open source softwares. And if you're trading stocks on Bombay Stock Exchange, it is also on open source. And so is our coach. Most of them have adopted free and open source software. But you might not know that you're consuming free and open source software because most of these players don't publish their code in open. And most of the time they don't acknowledge that this particular server, this particular service is being run on free and open source software. And which is a problem because When you don't know that you're consuming free and open source software, you don't have a thought process that you have to contribute back. You don't have the thought process that this is something which community is building, and there are several volunteers who have been spending a lot of their weekends, a lot of their free time to make this software functional. So I think that's what we are hoping with our study and the work Rishikesh is doing, that more and more people understand and appreciate what free and open source software can do for them and acknowledge it as well. So we did a very small study on how the timeline has evolved, and you can access all of it at stateofpos.in. So I won't go into the details of it, but we have highlighted 6 major eras in which free and open source software has grown globally and even in India. And this is how the timeline looks. So you can go and see what is promising is there are a lot of communities which are quite active here. They are quite vocal about how free and open source can shape policy and technology landscape in India. And they have been coming much more together, much more often to share their knowledge, share their work in open. And we are also seeing lately more and more businesses like Zerodha, businesses like Chatfoot, Prepe, ERP Next, coming out of India, which are built on open source. So there is much more wider adoption in business processes of free and open source software these days. And at the same time, there are organizations who can provide legal and policy support to you if you're looking for free and open source software alternatives. So the ecosystem is growing quite vibrant in last couple of years. I would spend some time on this slide specifically because there are some really great FOSS-led opportunities for India. The number one is the technology growth. I think if we rely more on free and open source software, the chances of we becoming much more emerging global leader in some of these technologies is much more brighter. Things like what Rishikesh is doing makes complete sense because currently if I were to test out a new drone product, it's very cumbersome for me to get a particular approval, get someone to give me the right amount of information to try out all things. But with things going open source, it's much more faster, much more easier for everyone to try out new things. And it just helps you customize, helps you build on top of something which is someone already created. It also gives you an opportunity to create more FOSS stacks, stacks which are free and open source software built. It also helps you preserve your privacy, have more trust and ethics. So if I have to go for a flight, I don't need to give that data to a third-party agency just to get a license approval for that particular flight. So that kind of data privacy and control on my data is much more easier if I can host the software myself, if I can look into the code, look into all the different moving pieces of software. It just helps you bring much more trust and much more ethical computing. In terms of economic growth, I think it definitely boosts financial inclusion. It helps you include more number of people from marginalized background, because you can customize the software to different context. You can customize the software for different languages, different ecosystem, much more easily because the whole software piece is now in open. I don't need to figure out that how do I make the software piece work in some other language, for example, Gujarati. I can just collaborate with translators there and quickly rewrite the software layer only related to that particular language because the whole piece is in open. It also helps you onboard more MSMEs. So in this example, organizations like Vibhus are able to reuse what Rishikesh has created and contribute on it because the whole ecosystem is quite open. Everyone can collaborate. They don't need to invest on their own on figuring out the technology and figuring out different nuances. So they can save a lot of cost and initial usage of software gets much more smoother, especially for MSMEs and other players. And we are able to contribute much more to the global economy, because whatever is created here can be used in other countries as well. And it just opened doors for multilateral partnerships, etc. And lastly, under talent growth, I think the opportunity to create common-based knowledge is here with us. We have a software piece which is open. We all can contribute to it. We can all share our experiences, our issues with that particular technology piece, open bugs, file different reports on how that software performed and different nuances. All of that is possible because it's not just the software piece which is open, it's also the ecosystem around that software is also open, and development is open. So there's a sort of a shared roadmap of where this piece of code would move forward in coming months to come. And that also brings in more opportunities for us to improve our leadership and collaboration. So there are a lot of opportunities here. And the ecosystem is quite vibrant. We are seeing community members, different Python communities are quite active in India now, and our community is quite active in India. We are seeing PyCon, which is a Python conference which happens on a regular basis, mostly yearly basis, in different cities in India. So more and more developers are coming in the ecosystem. More frequently, they are contributing. There are more funders and nonprofits and volunteers getting involved in this ecosystem to grow the community. Even in this conversation, I briefly heard before I joined that certain educational institutes are quite keen to participate. And that is possible because the software piece is open. Several research institutes can collaborate, can encourage their students and research fellows to work closer with that software piece and contribute to make that whole ecosystem much more stable. And there are more and more businesses who are now coming forward and taking time to engage with the FOSS products, taking time to understand how their business operations could be scaled using free and open source software. And lastly, we have also seen governments slightly more open to adopt free and open source software. And also the policies like the e-government's policy or other policies are in favor of free and open source software. So there is a trust-based relationship with governments as well being involved in this ecosystem. There are still certain challenges and barriers for all of them. I won't go in detail, but all of that is covered in our report as well. So we would love to hear from your perspective. Do you also see some of those key challenges? And what do you think about some of the recommendations our team is presenting? So we have done those challenges and recommendation mapping for communities, for educational institutes, for businesses, as well as for governments. So in your experience, wherever you feel that some of this is relevant, do let us know. And if in your experience it doesn't feel that this is something which you encounter, then we would be all ear to that as well. And we are seeing that the adoption of free and open source software has increased much more in the pandemic. We are seeing things like COVID-19 India, which is sort of an open source repository of COVID-19 related cases happening. We are seeing institutes like IISc opening up their code. We are seeing IBM opening up their code in the COVID-19, and similarly Kerala government running their software in open. So we are seeing all of this is much more closer in this space during a situation of crisis as well. And yeah, we are hoping that more such peers would come together, more such peers would collaborate and shape sort of a national FOSS alliance. And this would give advantage to a lot of new players to come together, share their knowledge, and also build capacity of other stakeholders. So that's where we are suggesting building of a national FOSS alliance where education institutes, businesses, communities, and governments, all four can work together to strengthen the free and open source software ecosystem. That's the team who has helped shape this report. A big thank you to all of them, people from Civic Data Lab, Omidyar Network, and certain independent researchers and designers. And you can download the report here. And yeah, if you have any questions on how free and open source software can benefit you, I'm more than happy to answer that.
Perfect. Thank you. Questions? Okay. Well, I hope Gaurav can join us again. As I said to you, this is just the first webinar of many subsequent webinars, and at the moment the thinking is that we will have the next one at the end of March or in mid-April, where we'll mostly get Gaurav again to talk about this, and obviously I'll share some of the details and the progress on our side as far as Aerobridge is concerned. I leave you with two things. Once I share the presentation, you will see a link to apply to this testing program, like that Dr. Jagan Raj also mentioned. So please, if you have an interest, please join the testing program. If nothing, you will understand what it means with this new, let's say, world that's coming in the drone side. And then, as I said to you, we are sort of fairly active on Slack. So there is if you go to aerobridge.in, there is a Slack channel request to please come there. And with this, I close. Thank you so much for your time. And you will get the recording and the webinar slides shortly, and be in touch. Bye.